when you want to negotiate with terrorists, you cannot do it directly. You have to do it through intermediary, and then you can say, "Well, we're not negotiating with Hamas. We're just negotiating through Qatar or Egypt." Now, in the Trump's recent attempt to make business more efficient, he hired someone funded by Qatar, most likely, to conduct those negotiations. We are, of course, talking about Steve Witkoff, who is the special envoy to the Middle East for the Trump administration and is sort of at the top or at the head of negotiations. And yeah, basically, what will be done about Gaza, about the hostages, about Israel. And I mean, this is not the only thing. We'll also cover a few more things because being the special envoy to Middle East, he, of course, has to have some stances on Hezbollah, Lebanon, Syria, Al-Jilani, the new, or technically the new leader of Syria, which surprisingly he is not that much better in that. We'll play a few clips. We have clips since he was on a podcast. He was on a podcast of Tucker Carlson because that's the type of personality you want to go to as someone working within the Trump administration. Now, we've covered many times who Tucker Carlson is, the how much he was playing with both anti-Semitism with people like Candace Owens, but also playing around with neo-Nazi apologetics with people like, I'm not even gonna remember that historian's name, but we've also covered that. Maybe I can quickly find it so I can let people know. But yeah, so we'll go through that. We'll start with about 4 minutes in, where he talks a little bit about Qatar. I think it's important, and then we'll go to about 14 minutes in, where he talks about October 7th and also how the negotiations have been going and how he is planning to sort of lead them. Welcome to the Daily Objective. Joining me today is James Valliant. And James, before we go to the clips, anything you'd like to say?
I'm glad we have clips because you really, in order to understand the extreme condition, and I'm going to try and keep it clean here because watching the interview he did with Tucker Carlson has put me in a pretty emotional state. But, you know, as Witkoff himself says, when you see something emotional, you've got to set that aside and be dispassionate about it. So I'm going to try and be just as objective and dispassionate about this idiot, worse than naive. I mean, if it were simply a matter of naivete, he would make Neville Chamberlain look like a tough guy. I will not insult the former prime minister of the United Kingdom, who appeased Hitler and declared he had found peace in our time when Hitler was about to launch a world war in Europe. No, this is naivete even more extreme than that. It is a failure of moral thinking. It is a stupid naivete. It's beyond stupid. So you have to question the man's sincerity, actually. But he worships Donald Trump, and he is willing, and as an echo of that, he's perfectly willing to negotiate with any monster, however horrific, on this planet. He appears to want to directly negotiate with Hamas, but he knows we can't politically do that. So we're doing that through our glorious allies, don't you know, Qatar, who are just wonderful people and they want only the best for everybody. And what good allies Qatar is. It is unbelievable how witless this Witkoff guy is. And so I honestly have to question the sincerity of the Trump administration on this whole issue, simply as a result of this. Obviously, just to appear on Tucker Carlson, who cavorts, as you have indicated, with vile anti-Semites, and he is willing to buy peace at any price. For Witkoff to, even if it means dictatorship and more war. And they talk about cycles of war, and at the same time simultaneously sucked in to precisely the cycle of peace negotiations, which keeps war continuously going. But it is all I can say is let's go into the clips so that we can just see what a moral savage he is about dealing with real savages.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to sort of the current president's policy on Middle East, it's sort of a unique thing. I mean, if you look at any other allies America has, they were pretty much thrown off the boat.
Yeah.
Ukraine has been almost
Europe,
abandoned. Uh,
Ukraine, you name
European
it.
Union has
Oh, yeah.
completely been pushed aside. Canada and Mexico as well. Pretty much any ally America had were betrayed by America. At least that's my view right now. And Israel was the pretty much exception, even though it kind of wasn't, because Witkoff was the person who pushed Netanyahu into taking the deal. So even from the start, there was something much different going on. But more recently, there seemed something better. Israel is going back in. It's very unsure what exactly is going on. But sort of hearing these words from Witkoff, I think, are clarifying of
I,
what the Trump administration is going to do.
I realize now that his rhetoric about hell to pay when it comes to Gaza or Iran is pure rhetoric. Pure rhetoric. What Trump says is not an assertion, especially when it's a moral evaluation. It's a negotiating tactic. As you correctly indicate, he's willing to offend, betray, turn his back on all of America's true allies and make peace with any dictator on this planet. And all that hell to pay stuff was just window dressing for political purposes domestically and a negotiating tactic. He's perfectly happy to negotiate with any monster, even the monsters in the Middle East. True. I mean, and it's strange. One more, just one side comment. Trump is perfectly capable of acknowledging, at least rhetorically, that some people are savages or animals. He uses that term, for example, when it comes to Trende Aragua gang members. I absolutely agree with him. Those criminals are, the crimes they commit are savage and brutal, and you don't negotiate with those kind of people. But when it comes to savages and animals who are committing the atrocities of October 7th or the Iranian Islamic Republic, he doesn't, it is suddenly an amoral thing. It's suddenly, well, both sides have a valid point and they want to live too. And all we have to do is find out what they want and, feel out this negotiation. And he doesn't know what dictatorship is. And in the Middle East, it's particularly disgusting because he sees this savage behavior. I mean, with Ukraine, with Russia, stealing Ukrainian children, committing atrocities in Ukraine. Oh yeah, that he's perfectly. Both sides have to come to the negotiation. Both sides are responsible. But I'd like and notice in this interview too. Later on, they do talk about Ukraine, and oh boy, Witkoff, who's an old friend of Mr. Trump, tells us just how much Trump respects Mr. Putin. Now, in the wake of October 7th, you'd think, okay, maybe that's he sees moral clarity now. No, not a drop of moral clarity. I would call it naive and childish if I didn't think there was really something despicably dishonest behind it. Because it makes Neville Chamberlain look like he's, a sophisticated, wise person with forethought about how you deal with dictators. Trump doesn't know what a dictator is. Full stop. I've said that before, and now it's perfectly plain for all to see.
Okay, let's listen a bit.
And I think you've been criticized for saying that out loud.
Well, I think it's important to recognize that everybody may want something. I think in the case of the Qataris, they're criticized for not being well motivated. It's preposterous. They are well motivated. They're good, decent people. What they want is a mediation that's effective, that gets to a peace goal. And why? Because they're a small nation and they want to be acknowledged as a peacemaker. And I think the president realizes that, and I realize that today. But we have to know that. If they had a different agenda, it would be important for us to know that different agenda. I think if they had a different agenda, it would be fine, as long as we weren't operating blind. And operating blind is really the problem in a negotiation like this. You have to know where everybody stands.
Just laughing because what you're saying is so obviously true. It's a prerequisite to getting a deal. And yet.
Oh yeah, I mean, put yourselves in the shoes of a dictatorship and a terrorist group. I mean, how else are you gonna make a deal with them? I mean, again, this whole idea that Qatar is some sort of, some sort of peacemaker, some sort of, they just really want the Middle East to prosper. They just really want the Israelis and Palestinians to live by each other and prosper. I mean, just few things to like quickly shoot off about Qatar. The fact that they have Al Jazeera, the state-funded media. Just on Friday, we've covered the Wikipedia story about how few dozen people basically took over Wikipedia, especially when it comes to Israel and anything relating to Israel and Palestinians. And what was their number one media source when they used to source things? It was Al Jazeera, because it is understood that that is pretty much straight up propaganda machine for, in one hand, Palestinians, but most importantly, Qatari interests. And when it is in Qatari interest to argue against Israel, to fight against Israel, that's what they'll do. I mean, in what scenario, if there is a nation that is, again, intermediary for a terrorist organization, why would we ever sort of view them as something positive? Hamas leaders were in Doha. That's where they were staying. And the only time Israel got to them is when they went away for a bit.
They
Qatar
harbor Hamas terrorists. They harbor Hamas terrorists and leaders, put them up in four-star hotels, and Qatar is perfectly happy to coexist with the monsters who committed October 7th to give them aid, comfort, and protection. And, oh yeah, boy, that is a point that cannot be stressed enough. Yes, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Daniel, but there are also bad actors when it comes to Turkey's influence in the new government in Syria, for example. There, Al Jazeera. We could go down a list of how Qatar. Now, we do have a military base there, as Witkoff points out. America has been shamefully sanctioning Qatar itself. Why? Because they can be these mediators, these negotiators with Iran or some terrorist organization in the Middle East for us. Well, why are they mediators? Because they have perfectly friendly relations with the worst actors in the region.
We have a switch chat from Enric. Thank you so much. He says Witkoff's business got property purchase far beyond price from Qatar. He's been positive to and likely beholden to Qatar since then. He's not naive. We did an episode on that. Basically, he bought, or sort of his firm, his company bought one hotel, I think it was in New York, that a few years later he tried to sell. He wasn't able to sell, and then he was able to sell it to Qatari investment fund, or the whatever they call it. They have this sovereign fund is the name of it, which is basically, it's the money that they have from the oil to be used to basically buy off politicians and buy off property in different countries. But I mean, when it comes to conflict of interest, it is not even necessarily saying that Witkoff is bought by Qatar, but the fact that someone who sells property directly to Qatar and then is speaking positively of that government, especially when it comes to these important negotiations, that should be enough to basically never send anybody like him even near that, even if somehow he wasn't beholden to them. The conflict of interest is completely destroyed here.
What we call it in law is the mere appearance of a conflict of interest. And here we have at least the appearance of a conflict of interest. But then you listen to this interview and the fulsome praise he heaps upon Qatar. They're good people. They want peace. He has nothing. They're allies. They're good allies of America, is the way he puts it. And so this is precisely why I say the naivete here is so extreme. I mean, worse than Neville Chamberlain naivete, that one has to suspect bad faith is going on here, or a degree of blindness that perhaps, his own personal relations may have influenced his vision on this matter, his judgment on this matter. But in general, he and Trump both look at this as kind of a real estate deal, as if it was a property acquisition or development deal in the United States, and he's dealing with dictators and terrorists in the same way that you would make a real estate deal within the United States. And that is worse than naive. But so you have to wonder. You have to wonder about this guy's actual interests. It's so stupid. I mean, I was calling him. I don't like name calling, but Witkoff, Witless, was the clean version I had of his last name. I was so angry this morning. But you begin to think that it's not so witless. It may be quite intentional. This is the way Witkoff and Trump look at the world. They are morally blind. Morally blind. In fact, he confesses his own moral blindness. And I think we'll get to it in certain clips. But yeah, Qatar is not our friend. And he heaps praise on them. And you have to wonder about his own relations with the Qatari government when he heaps such unvarnished praise on a nation that has just recently, harbored Hamas terrorists and leaders.
Yeah, I mean, even when it comes to the naivete, and obviously politicians are gonna say something different in front of the cameras and something different behind the doors. I mean, the sort of the saddest part of the last few years is the fact that the only time we called out dictators for what they are is when Biden was president, and he did it by mistake when he called Xi a dictator, because you're not supposed to really call them that, and he did it by mistake. But there is like an understanding, like we know these people are evil. Even politicians know Qatar is a dictatorship and it's evil. Iran is evil. Putin is evil. China is evil. But because of the domineering pragmatism and not enough moral conviction, there is this, well, yes, but we cannot call them that because we need to deal, you have to deal with people. You cannot call them out evil. But so maybe something similar is going on here, which is even more evil, because it would mean that we want this deal. We really want this deal. So we'll just say whatever we want about Qatar. We'll legitimize it morally and practically by getting this deal. I mean, we already have a base there. They already have the legitimacy. It's Hamas that will be legitimized. It's Hamas that will be able to persevere through that.
Oh, and Witkoff even seems in this interview to regret the fact that we have to operate through Qatar. I mean, how strange it is that we have to use this intermediary Qatar. Shouldn't we be talking directly to Hamas, is the implication? No, they are morally blind. They are like, they're worse than 2-year-olds in the sense that they're moral savages. They do not really, Witkoff and Trump really cannot see the practical importance of moral judgment, the life and death importance of moral judgment. No, they just want the credit for getting a peace deal. And if things go to hell, as they surely will if Hamas survives, if Hamas remains in Gaza, surely it will at some point explode and you'll have another October 7th. And Trump will blame it on, if he's alive at the time, he'll still out of office, he'll blame it on whoever the president is, because it's all a matter of personalities. His ego problems are such that it's all about Trump, 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 and the glory that Trump could get by getting an unprecedented peace deal. And Witkoff is willing to deal with anybody, the worst monsters and savages on the globe, if it means glory to his boss, Trump, whom he hero worships, as you can also hear in this interview.
We have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. And yeah, something that is truly, I mean, not even disappointing, but truly evil about this is the fact that when it comes to these dictatorships, when it comes to Russia, when it comes to Iran, when it comes to China, in many cases, they could have fallen such a long time ago. We could have already dealt with them. Something immediately jumped to my mind. It's maybe I use examples from the games too much, but I was playing one grand strategy game, and when you're like fighting a war against someone, and then suddenly your ally is like, well, let's make a deal, and you're like, wait, this can be over. We can finish this. We can have peace for the eternity. But you want to like give up for no good reason. And this is exactly what is going on.
Throw them a lifeline. Throw them support. Yeah. Give them the moral and material, the moral sanction and the material support that the bad guys need to survive, rather than wiping out the Nazis, as the Allies did in World War II, and making sure it never arises in Central Europe again. Okay, no, we don't take that. We don't have that kind of moral clarity like we do, and that's the only way to achieve peace. They talk peace, 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 even as they're throwing moral sanction and material support to the aggressors. And they can't, like as in the Ukraine situation, they can't afford to distinguish between the aggressors and the victims. And so, in the wake of his discussion of October 7th, he immediately talks about, oh, how it was Israel's fault for security lapses. No, it is not. When you got a atrocity committing aggressor, it's not the other guy, the victim's fault for not being sharp on the security that day. Okay, that is just morally perverse. What Witkoff says in this interview. Excuse me, I'm going to get emotional again if I keep talking like this. Yes, I think that Israel made mistakes in terms of security, but that does not justify what Hamas did. Hamas is unequivocally the bad guy. They're responsible for all the deaths. They're responsible for the condition of Gaza. They're responsible for any civilians being killed right now in Gaza. That's that. It is not a question of moral equivalence. And these people, Witkoff and Trump, apparently cannot see the world through a moral lens. And so they're utterly blind to evil, and they'll set us up for another October 7th. That's all that's going to happen here. To the extent Witkoff succeeds in keeping Hamas alive is precisely to the extent the sooner we will get another October 7th. And they can't see that at all because they are morally blind to the practical consequences of moral blindness.
Let's listen a bit more.
As a negotiator, you have to be dispassionate.
Yes,
It's not easy to be to make decisions if you're going to. But I had to see that film, Tucker. I mean, that film is a reality. I mean, we can't ignore the reality of what happened on October 7th.
right.
Now, they would tell you that they've got justification, but there's no justification for what happened that day. There just isn't. And unfortunately, there were security lapses that day that shouldn't have happened, that accentuated what happened that day,
Yes.
which shouldn't have happened. But
Do we understand that?
I think we understand that there were security lapses,
For sure.
that there were some mistakes that were made.
Yes.
But we're humans. We're not robots,
Oh, I
right?
agree.
We're not completely overwhelmed by AI right now. So people will make mistakes. There were intelligence mistakes, but there's some really good people who were involved here. I met some exceptional people in Israel. I mean, really some exceptional people who.
Yes.
And it's a difficult situation, but I think you have to know what Hamas wants. Just to go back to your question.
Yes.
And then you've got to figure out what you can give them that allows them to walk out, because that's what's needed.
We just need to give them, they need to save face. They need to, they did commit atrocities on October 7. Yes, they did decapitate some people. They did rape some people. But, they cannot go home to their people and say they completely lost. They need something to save face. I mean,
That's it.
I
What
cannot
can we
even
give
like
the
propose. Yeah.
monsters. How can we sanction the monsters? What do we need to pay the people who committed October 7th? How do we need to reward them for their evil? He in the bit right before, he was saying, yeah, I watched the film and I saw systematic rape, and it's one of the worst things I've ever seen in my whole life. And he says, he even mentioned mutilations, and said, yeah, I witnessed them as they sawed off the head of an Israeli soldier. So he's perfectly aware of the atrocities, the system. He called it even systematic rape. But then he said, you have to be, then we start in on the clip you just showed, but we have to be dispassionate. And by dispassionate, he doesn't mean put our emotions aside enough to be rational and have a moral judgment. We have to be immoral or amoral, or put that moral judgment aside, whatever its life and death consequences. And so for him, the next thing he brings up is Israeli security lapses. But, oh, yes, there's still some good people in Israel. So because it's Tucker who needs to be reminded that there are still some good people in Israel. So what is the goal? To figure out what they want. And as you point out, how they can walk away saving face. That is absolutely despicable. So what we have to do is figure out how to best negotiate with the people who committed the atrocities on October 7th that he recognizes. I see. So in your mind, people who commit systematic rape and mutilations of the most horrific kind on civilians, and as well as Israeli military. These people, all you need to do is figure out what they want, Daniel. When you figure out what they want, they'll no longer commit these atrocities. No, people who commit atrocities like this, people who can slaughter civilians, as happened on October 7th, you're seeing what they want. They're showing you what they want. What they want is more October 7th. Okay? He can see what they want in action and then say, well, all we have to do is figure out how to reward them for that behavior, and suddenly they'll back down, and they're a perfectly good faith bargaining partner, I guess. And their survival is no problem. Keeping Hamas in Gaza is absolutely no problem as far as he's concerned. In fact, Hamas is, if anything, they're just sort of imposing themselves on the Palestinian people. He's full of that mythology too. It is beyond naivete. It is ignoring evil. It is willful blindness to true evil. And when you do that, what you're doing when you take off the moral lenses, because people think moral lenses, that's, emotion and being subjective and all upset. No, when you take off the moral glasses, you are blind to life and death consequences. Real facts. He imputes to them an attitude that you'd impute to, that Trump won't even impute to Canada or the Kingdom of Denmark. So, I mean, it's that kind of moral inversion is what happens. Suddenly, Hamas gets all kinds of moral sanction. We can deal with them. Why shouldn't we be dealing with them directly, after all? But we can offend the Canadians and the Danes. Okay, that is a kind of moral inversion that is hard for me to even wrap my head around unless it is a willful kind of blindness, a willful blindness to the real consequences of sanctioning true evil.
Yeah, and so someone says, for sure, Witkoff is a tool and needs to go. Hopefully Mike Huckabee is appointed March 25th and will handle diplomacy with Israel. But again, try to remember, who was Biden's special envoy to Middle East? I don't know. I have no idea if we even had one, because who was doing it? It was the Secretary of State. It was, what's his name?
Blinken.
It was Antony Blinken who was dealing with negotiations, who was dealing all of that. Secretary Marco Rubio is the Secretary of State right now, and he has no say in this. I haven't heard him say anything when it comes to Middle East. I haven't heard him say pretty much anything when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. Secretary of State is one of the most powerful positions in Trump's cabinet. He is the fourth in the line of succession. Yet he has no say in this. Why is it Or Witkoff? Was Secretary Rubio just some sort of like appeasement? Like here, GOP Republicans, sort of like the old guys, like Marco Rubio is the Secretary of State, but he's not doing anything. He's not doing anything that Antony Blinken was for Biden.
When he was a senator, Marco Rubio spoke better sense about both Israel and Ukraine. Now that he is the Secretary of State, as you point out, one of America's top officials, the chief diplomat of the United States, he is crowded out because his former language as a senator was couched in the realistic terms of moral black and white. This is to negate all of those. Isn't that funny? Because people have this moral practical dichotomy. And that's what's at operation here when you're talking about the mentality of a pragmatist like Trump or Witkoff. They're such pragmatists that they must shut down the moral analysis. And by shutting down the moral analysis, they become blind to true psychological motivations, to true consequences that are life and death practical. And yeah, of course we have to silence Marco Rubio. He might say something that would, call Putin a dictator or an aggressor, or might call the Hamas savages that no human can deal with. Something, with moral sense might come out of Marco Rubio's mouth, and we can't afford that, can we? Daniel. And so we need a pragmatist, a real estate dealer, just like Trump is, to go in and, wheel and deal and schmooze with them and just get the right deal and give them the right rewards, give them the right face-saving thing, and they can walk away from this. What? Walk away with it with pride? No. If they, to the extent that Hamas can walk away with this saving face, is precisely the degree of the danger that still remains. They're utterly blind to that.
Yeah, and even though Mike Huckabee is one of the better ones when it comes to Israel, the fact is I have no idea who was the ambassador to Israel during Biden administration. Again, when it comes to any sort of cabinet, you can, especially when it comes to, I mean, I think it's most clear in the cases of vice presidents, they can pretty much kick sand for 4 years or do a lot of stuff. They do not have any sort of responsibilities. It's pretty much whatever the president gives them. And you can have more active. You can even have, vice presidents who are basically presidents, like fill out whoever you want. Yeah, the fact is that it is Trump who gives tasks on what to do, and the fact is, despite I mean, even when you take the position of special envoy is a sort of a unique position. There can be 50 of them or there can be one. They are specifically appointed to do certain things. And the fact is, Trump appointed Steve Witkoff specifically to do this. That's why nobody else is dealing. That's why when there was, I'm not even gonna remember his name, but when they had the chief negotiator or whoever that position was, he was quickly fired after sort of he tried to do something. So the fact is that Trump wants it done like this, and even when Mike Huckabee gets into his position once he gets appointed,
I'm sure he will be confirmed as the ambassador to Jerusalem.
Yeah, but also the question is,
look at things in a moral, through a moral lens. He's a sincere Christian, so it'll be tainted by all kinds of intrinsicism and altruism, as you can expect from a sincere Christian. But at least he would look at it through a moral lens. But he's shoved aside. And Witkoff was appointed by Trump, as you point out. No, all of these people serve at Trump's pleasure. Trump can fire any cabinet member he wants. And so they basically have to do Trump's bidding, these cabinet level officers or these special envoys. So what you're seeing here is the appointment of Rubio and Huckabee is sort of to put on a good face, to appease Israel and all those many Americans who support Israel. And on the other hand, to betray all of that moral sense of things and to appoint Witkoff, the ultimate Trump-worshipping pragmatist who would make a deal with any monster on this planet, and to make him your special envoy, that is the voice of Trump's policy, this Witkoff fellow. So Huckabee and Rubio, I'm afraid, whatever their private thoughts might be, they have to swallow them as they have betrayed whatever moral sense they have to this situation in order just simply to work for Trump in this context, it seems to me. Because Witkoff,
and also this is Trump cabinet number 2, not number 1. We are not living even in the time where he appointed good people because he believed they're good people and just let them do kind of what they want, like John Bolton, like Nikki Haley to the UN. People right now are picked for loyalty. That's the only thing. That's when, I mean, people should really sort of look back at the Zelensky meeting in the Oval Office and look at Marco Rubio. I mean, I think he is probably still welded in that couch of how much he was like falling into it because he couldn't believe what the hell was going on. And he wasn't able to speak out, or he didn't speak out. The fact is that even if Mike Huckabee does something different when it comes to Israel, tries to speak out differently, he'll either get fired or he'll step in line.
Right. No, absolutely correct. No, if you still are working for Mr. Trump and you can hear what's going on in Ukraine and now with Hamas, with Witkoff, and still work for him as a diplomat or in a diplomatic context, as an ambassador or secretary of state, you know what you're getting and you know who you're working for. And it wasn't the moral lens through which Senator Rubio or Governor Huckabee looked at things once upon a time. No, they've sold their souls, in effect, to a pragmatist who'll deal with any monster, as I say.
Let's listen a bit more.
Needed here. You know, what we heard in the beginning of this conflict is Hamas is ideological, they're prepared to die. For a whole variety of reasons, I personally, and I talked to the president about this, there's nothing I don't talk to the president about before we're going to make a decision.
Yes.
Because he is the guy.
Yes.
He was elected. I was not. None of the other people were. He was elected. And I think that's how we have to function. With that said, I said to him, I don't think that they are as ideologically locked in. They're not ideologically intractable. I never believe that, by the way. I believe they strap on the suicide vests onto young kids who don't know what they're doing, right? And they tell them a story. And once you understand that, once you understand that they wanted to live, then you were able to talk to them in a more effective way.
Smart. That is smart.
Excuse me. Smart, totally smart. No, totally evasive. These people used hospitals, schools. They used their own civilians. They used their own sick people. They used their own children. And they have said out loud that they would rather die. We loved death more than you love life. And that is their ideology. There is no more ideologically consistent group of people on this planet right now, ideologically set in. Has he read the Hamas charter? Has he read anything about the ideology of jihadism? Has he read anything about Iran and Hezbollah? Does he understand the first thing about how people are ideologically motivated and driven and are willing to kill their own women and children and use them as human shields? These people don't use, Hamas does not wear uniforms. Why? So they can count everyone as a civilian death. Because to them, there is no difference between the population and them. And by the way, that's probably more correct. The Palestinians largely support Hamas and that kind of activity and that kind of fierce ideological activity. Now, wait, these people are mystics. Grounded in mysticism, they are tribalist, racist savages, and they're murderous to the point of suicidal. Now, he can say, oh, they just strap bombs to kids and tell them a story. I think that's how he put it there. Well, think about the ability to do that. Think about the ideological commitment, and consistency it takes to strap a bomb to one of the children on your side so that they can go in and kill Jews, which is the motivation for these people. These people are motivated by an irrational, mystically founded hatred of Jews. And these people they hate civilization itself. And through the course of the last decades, surely we've gotten the idea that they will lie in any negotiation just to stay alive. They will say whatever they need to say just so they can survive. Now, look at what Israel has done in Gaza. Hamas will say whatever it takes right now to survive. And this guy is expressing the most it's beyond naive. And then you have Mr. Carlson there. I'm going to try and be as polite as I can to that entity, which is very difficult for me right now. But he says to him, but Tucker says to Witkoff, smart, when it is the dumbest, and I will add most morally irresponsible, blind thing you can imagine. It is moral savagery mentally trying to deal with the physical savagery of ideologically motivated suicidal monsters whose mysticism and racism makes them the most ideologically committed people on this planet right now, as far as I can tell. Everyone else is a pragmatist, objectivism. We stand for reason and individualism. We are intellectually, ideologically consistent. But, these people are so ideologically committed that they can, Mr. Witkoff, strap bombs to their own children. Now, if that it seems to Mr. Carlson to be smart, I think Mr. Carlson is worse than dumb. This is truly blind to evil.
Yeah, when I've heard that, there are times when, and this happened, I think, also on October 7th, when, something really bad happens and you just listen to the rhetoric that is being used. And once you hear a certain words, a certain concepts, then you're like, fuck. Because this is not going to be fought properly. Because as soon as somebody says Hamas is not ideological, that means, okay, we will not fight the ideology. We will not fight it. We will refuse to fight. We will say, well, but civilians are different. Civilians don't support Hamas, and Hamas is actually, they have a will to live. That's what he said at the end. They want to live. So they'll be reasonable. They'll allow, again, reasonable people do not go to war with each other. reasonable people do not cut through the fence so they can go kidnap children and then beat them up with their fists. And rape women and men, decapitate them. That's not what you expect from reasonable people who want to live. That is what you expect from pure ideologically committed people committed to killing off a certain kind of people. And that is exactly what Hamas is, and that is exactly what Palestinians support and want. And we just heard from the pretty much chief negotiator that he doesn't think that's important. It's just we need to give them an out, and we know that nothing is gonna be done here again.
Ayn Rand, in her magnum opus Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand has a term that and for good people to understand this, her hero had to make it really clear. These people worship death. Do not impute your love of life to people who really do not love life. They worship death. Okay? And don't confuse a fear of short-term death with a love of life either. Points that Ayn Rand makes so eloquently. And it is hard for the Western mind to wrap its head around this kind of death worship. But a true mystic, a committed, ideologically, what he thinks isn't even, I guess, possible for the human psychology, ideologically committed death worship is exactly what you're seeing here. And mystics are perfectly capable. That's what the essence of true mysticism is, a hatred of this life on earth. And that you cannot deal with. That you must destroy. You must utterly incapacitate, psychologically cow. There can be no negotiation. There can be no moral sanction of that. Or you are setting yourself up for the death worship in action that we saw on October 7th. Unbelievable sanction of the worst kind of atrocities going on this planet. And he thinks he can deal with it. He thinks that these people want to walk away. All we have to do is, help them, like you say, save face. And these people, they can, sure, they love life, don't you know? And no, they hate Israel, civilization, a rational civilization, much more than they care for their own lives. And so you see, Mr. Witkoff, they're willing to strap bombs to their own children and tell them a story to go kill Jews. Mr. Witkoff can actually watch a video in which he sees what he describes as systematic rape and mutilation and walk away saying, well, I got to dispassionately put all that aside. No, you cannot afford to put that aside in your mind. You think it's just emotion? No, and then what does he operate on? Reason? No, he's now operating on an entirely different set of emotional priorities. Right? To him, he's just not thinking, but using emotions as tools of cognition himself. So he's utterly blind to another group of people who are far more savage and far more violent in their actions. But it's the same kind of irrational blindness. These people are ideologically committed, Mr. Witkoff. I'm sorry. And if you're blind to that and blind to the capacity to commit atrocities, then you're the least qualified person to negotiate. If we were to negotiate, you shouldn't negotiate with Hamas at all. But if I were theoretically somehow forced to negotiate with Hamas, Witkoff would be the last person you'd want to send in there because he's absolutely blind to actual moral consequences and is willing to evade the atrocities of October 7th. He said it basically out loud. I have to put that aside. That gets me awfully emotional. I have to put that aside so that my other emotions can kick in and I can go for peace. Because he thinks that the way to get peace is to sanction the perpetrators of those kind of atrocities. And gosh, if you focus too much on those atrocities, Daniel, then you'd just never really be able to negotiate with these people. You never recognize. No, these people are liars. Every time we've negotiated in a serious way with Islamic committed people, they have lied to us, suckered us in, just so they can once more do another terrorist attack or another attack on Israel or another attack on Americans. How many times do we have to sit through this movie? Mr. Witkoff is willing to have us sit through more October 7th again and again and again in the name of stopping an October 7th. He says out loud, well, we can't have another October 7th, but I have to put aside everything I saw that happened on October 7th. Oh, unbelievable. He shouldn't be an envoy or negotiator for America on any subject. He is morally blind.
Yeah, and the biggest question is like what are we doing here? It's the same sort of thing. Like once you start compromising on your morality, once you start compromising on your principles, it's like, well, what are we doing here? Like, what is the point now? Yes, we get some sort of a peace deal with Hamas, and they stay in Gaza, and yeah, we can go about our life until something happens again. I mean, what kind of that is what I really do not understand about any sort of like compromise when it comes to moral principles, because like, what are you getting out of it? Like, what is how much
Glory for
even when
Trump. Credit for Trump. What we get out of it is giving Trump a Nobel Peace Prize. I know, and Trump, I think they realize Trump will never get a Nobel Peace Prize. But what they get out of it is the kind of credit for bringing peace to the region that no one else thought was possible. Oh, the Middle East has been a problem for thousands of years. We'll never have this solution to it. So even the most short-term, and for Trump, what is that? Another 3.5 years? So long as there's a short-term thing that we can give Trump credit for, he's willing to compromise on anything. Well, if you can't see that the people who committed October 7th are ideologically set in and committed, the thing he's convinced that Hamas isn't. So no, Hamas institutionally must be destroyed. And he's trying to figure out a way to preserve Hamas as an organization. All we need to do is demilitarize Gaza, don't you know? And Hamas can still be a player, still be a participant. No, they're ideologically driven. It goes all the way down psychologically to their toes, okay? And he has to evade that, and he's evading that intentionally. It is in order to get Trump some kind of political credit. That's what's going on, Daniel.
Let's listen to one more clip.
The next thing we need to deal with Iran is that they're being a benefactor of these proxy armies, right? Because we've proven that that's not existential. They, for all intents and purposes, destroyed Hezbollah, so they're not really an existential risk. Hamas, same thing. The Houthis, we're in a conflict with them today. I think we'll prove that they won't be an existential risk either. But if we can get these terrorist organizations eliminated as risks, not existential, but still risks, they're destabilizing risks, then we'll normalize everywhere. I think Lebanon could normalize with Israel, literally. Normalize meaning a peace treaty with the two countries. That's really possible. Syria too. The indications are that Jelani is a different person than he once was, and people do change. You at 55 are completely different than how you were at 35.
That's for sure.
And I say to myself, I'm a different person today at 68 years old. I'm not the person I knew 30 years ago.
Oh yeah, he grew up. James. There's few things I want to say on, and then we go to earlier stuff. Few things I want to say about the idea that Al-Jilani, the new so-called president of Syria, sort of grew up. Again, he didn't like join some like Islamist youth when he was like 13 and then like went to the West and like educated. No, he joined Al-Qaeda, then he stayed there, then he formed his own group, and then with that group, he took over Syria. It's like saying that, Hitler did try to coup a government in Bavaria, and then he had agitators and paramilitary force, and destabilized Germany until he was appointed the chancellor, and maybe set Reichstag on fire. But once he fully got into power, then he maybe he changed. I mean, that was like 10 years. Come on, like, what do you think? Like this whole idea of that people like
talk about
something
evasion.
like that would change is ridiculous. And even
we're
the
going
idea,
to ignore his whole past, and we're going to believe whatever BS line he gives us now. Well, because his friends in Qatar and his friend, I guess, Erdogan in Turkey are willing to deal with Jelani. And oh my gosh, well, see, he's a different man. We can make
Well,
peace. Doesn't matter what their past is. Doesn't matter what he did in the past or said in the past. And these things aren't existential, don't you know? If Hamas continues to exist, if Gaza is demilitarized, well, they're no longer an existential threat just because they're Hamas. The Houthis will no longer be an existential threat if we can push them back enough. And geez, that must mean that Iran, even though, now wait a minute, even if you eliminated those organizations, Iran would create and fund a new organization that would be out to destroy Israel and ultimately civilization. Iran is an existential threat to civilization. They have been for nearly 50 years. They have been killing Americans and Israelis for decades. Iran is ideological. Are they not ideological? I guess they're not ideologically. The Islamic Republic of Iran, which funds the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas, they're not ideologically motivated either. They're not an existential threat. So Iran, the Islamic Republic can survive. Hamas can survive so long as they demilitarize. They're not an existential threat. And whatever deal we strike, whatever deal we might strike with Lebanon or Jelani or Qatar or the Hamas, none of that's an existential threat, don't you know, Daniel? Because they're not really ideologically motivated to kill as many Jews as they possibly can get their hands on, to destroy Israel and ultimately destroy Western civilization. No, that's not what it's about. We can deal with these monsters. That is evasion on a scale that is really hard to wrap one's head around. I mean, it is monstrous evasion of simple facts. He's willing to ignore the entire biography of Jelani. He's willing to ignore the entire history of Qatar. He's willing to think that Hamas, if the area is demilitarized, could survive and not be an existential threat. And of course, we can ultimately make a deal with Iran, because after all, maybe they're not ideologically motivated either, Daniel. Don't you see? That is factual evasion, not just moral evasion, but it's just basic facts that he's overlooking and evading, whether it's the biography of Jelani or the continued existence of Hamas or being able to deal with Iran. It's unbelievable evasion of basic facts and history. And what happens every time you make a deal with these Islamist monsters? They are lying to you. They are lying to you, Mr. Witkoff. They will say whatever will please you if they need to, only if they feel they need to, but they will lie and say whatever they feel they need to so they can survive the Trump administration and live to perpetrate more October 7ths in their quest to kill as many Jews as possible and destroy the state of Israel. That is their goal because they are ideological. That's what they live and breathe. Long ago, there could have been a wonderful civilization on the West Bank, in Gaza. There could be a wonderful civilization in Lebanon. There could be a wonderful civilization in Iran long ago, but for the ideological anti-life commitments of the people there and their rulers. I mean, if they could have had a wonderful place before, oh, geez, they could have been a rights-respecting, peace-loving people who recognized Israel, willing to trade, openly and have women have freedom in their countries, but not be so oppressive. They could have had a civilized, peaceful country. They could be prosperous. They could at least be a decent place. They could have had that chance. They have chosen against that, Mr. Witkoff. They've already explicitly chosen against being sane, civilized, prosperous, peaceful. No, they're ideologically committed and ideologically committed in a suicidal way. And even you admit they're willing to kill their own children in this, but you can't see that as an existential threat. Un-effing believable.
Yeah, and even the idea that, the only thing stopping Middle East from normalizing relations with Israel are terrorist organization, it's like, what are you even talking about? You think Lebanon is like, God, we really want to normalize relations with Israel, but Hezbollah stole our pens from signing up the normalization agreement. We just cannot do anything about that. Hezbollah is in the government of Lebanon. They have positions in the cabinet itself, or in the government itself rather. UNIFIL hasn't done anything about Hezbollah in the south. Lebanon itself hasn't done anything about Hezbollah in the south. What is Egypt here? this Muslim Brotherhood, they just again they're stealing our pens from like signing like normalization agreements. We cannot do anything.
Oh, and he's
Like it's
more concerned
ridiculous.
about, a radical takeover in Egypt or Jordan, because the king of Jordan and the generalissimo of Egypt, they're keeping the truly evil forces at bay. And if we give in too much to Israel, if we fight Hamas too much, if we don't find a peaceful solution in Gaza, well, who knows? They could become even worse. And so it would be our fault for not compromising with Hamas, in short, rather than, and boy, talk about American aid. Jordan and Egypt survive on American aid. If they are a problem, and what our justification is that we are holding back something worse that might take over in both countries. That is absolutely looking at things upside down, inside out, and backwards. What we're doing is keeping morally sanctioning and keeping the worst elements there in place in power. And only by evading on the grandest scale everything we know about the Middle East and these Islamic nations and organizations.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing is completely ridiculous. And, when it comes to sort of foreign aid, now I was just thinking about something. We have the Doge that has been like going through US aid. And my question is, why hasn't we heard one time about the money that is going to Egypt and Jordan? That, we're giving money to dictatorships. I mean, when it comes to waste and fraud, I mean, what the hell are we doing there?
Well, that's not waste and fraud. You see, we're keeping at bay the evil elements. That's the excuse we have in our head. No, that's why it can't just be a focus on government efficiency or waste, fraud, and abuse. You have to address the actual policy. You have to belly up to the bar and discuss actually the main essence of the policy. You have to say this program is wrong and needs to go. Government ought not to be doing this. Government is doing an immoral thing. Government is hurting people in this policy. And here, there's a really clear example. Our aid is sanctioning Israel's enemies here, who are not lifting a finger to do anything to, and all that, when we're paying a hefty price for that aid. But nope. You won't hear Doge talk about the foreign aid to Egypt or Jordan. No, sir. That's the price of moral blindness, you see. A non-principled stance on any political issue, on any diplomatic issue. No, you put your finger right on it, Daniel.
Someone said USA provided the front for CIA operations. I wish CIA was as effective as the conspiracy theorists are talking about it. I wish CIA overthrew the regime in Iran.
Yeah.
I wish CIA overthrew the regime in actual dictatorships. Like the fact is that they're barely doing anything, or at least not anything that we've seen in the past.
We're in bed with them to appease them. What are you talking about? We're sanctioning them and morally supporting them, no matter how bad their behavior. No, and the results are what we see before you in the Middle East. How long do we need to do this? As I say, how many times do we need to sit through the same bloody, violent film?
Well, we'll see what will continue happening with Steve Witkoff if he will continue to stay in his position. So far, it seems like Trump does enjoy him in that position, and that Steve Witkoff and his sort of strategy with going about this is what will pretty much happen right now. Now we'll be talking more about what's happening. The fact is that Israel is going a bit more into Gaza right now. What I'm worried about, if it truly is sort of just a pressure tactic, basically saying, go in a bit, we'll get a better deal out of them, and then
if Witkoff and Trump get some kind of deal with these monsters, they will turn the pressure back on Israel. In fact, it's scarier in one way than Biden. It is true that Biden limited Israel's action, but should Trump and Witkoff get some kind of deal that they're satisfied with these monsters, they will be perfectly willing to put pressure back on Israel, but in a politically, astute way. They don't want to offend the American electorate, who, and bless the American electorate, they still look at these things in a moral way. They still don't evade the monstrosities of October 7th in the same way that Witkoff explicitly evades them. So yeah, this is not good for Israel in the long run. It could be far worse than Biden. It's taken me a while to say this because I had hopes. Maybe I'm the naive one, but I was hoping that Trump's policy on Israel and the Middle East would be better. But listening to Mr. Witkoff kind of shatters that, doesn't it? It kind of deflates you in the sense that these people have no moral values, no moral sensibility, and they're perfectly willing to evade atrocities. I mean, you can see them, and he'll say, "No, I'll have to be dispassionate and put all that aside." Well, that's the moral reasoning that he's putting aside as well, and that has deadly consequences.
Yeah, I mean, it was something I was warning about before the election, that there is a possibility that Trump might be even worse on Israel than Biden. Now, obviously, we have no idea what Kamala Harris would have done if she was the president, and we cannot really judge based on that. But I think there was something to also point out is the last ceasefire that happened around the January 20th was Biden's deal that was on the table for 9 months before it actually happened. So Biden wasn't able to push it for 9 months, and then Trump was through Witkoff.
Well, with Trump's threat, they'll be held to pay, but then there wasn't held to pay. We got some hostages out. I mean, even hostages who looked like they'd been starved and beaten, frankly. But okay, we got some hostages out. There's still hostages there, but now no one can deal with Hamas. Hamas refuses to demilitarize, and so Mr. Trump throws up his hands, and at some point, all Hamas has to do is say, "Okay, if you let us survive and stay in Gaza, we'll demilitarize." I mean, at what point will Israel succeed in getting Hamas to that point? Well, that's the point that Trump will draw the line and demand that Israel accept the existence of Hamas in Gaza. Because listening to Witkoff, that appears to be the end goal of Witkoff and Trump. Hamas's survival in Gaza, just so long as they temporarily disarm. Right.
We also have a super chat from Knows Too Much. Thank you so much. He says Witkoff is not naive. He is immoral on Qatar's money. I wouldn't let the sort of he's on Qatar's money to sort of let him excuse from the moral blame. I mean,
Right.
even when you do something just for money, what you have done is
He
still
might be lower than someone who takes a bribe, much lower in a way than someone who takes a bribe, someone who morally evades and mentally puts aside the atrocities of October 7th so he can deal with the perpetrators. Right. No, we have to treat them, as we've said many times on this program, we have to treat them as the Allies treated the Nazis during World War II. Utterly destroy them. Denounce the ideology behind it. And if Bavaria needed denazification after World War II, Gaza needs de-jihadization when this conflict is over, or it will happen again and again and again.
Well, with that, we'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective. Thank you guys for joining us today. Thank you, James, for joining me. And bye-bye.
Be safe.